organizational cultures are actually a collection of microcultures. And the microcultures are shaped by the leaders themselves. And I think what we see right now is that a lot of our leaders without sort of that big infrastructure are struggling to drive the kind of culture that they need because they are underprepared. They haven't been trained and developed in the right way to be able to take on the mantle of managing culture for their team.
Welcome to the HR L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day, CEO and founder of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. Tuning into the HR L&D Podcast will help you to discover strategic growth concepts, leadership development strategies, and the values and behaviours that drive organisational change and success. Together, let's empower our workforces, diversify our thinking, and achieve significant HR success.
Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day, CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we are specialist HR recruiters. Now remember, if you enjoyed the show, please do share it with all of your HR colleagues. Please remember to review it, subscribe to it, and together we can raise the profile of HR for everyone globally. And I mentioned globally because today I'm joined by Patricia Carl, who is the CEO of Highland Performance Solutions, a boutique women-owned organisation consulting firm that partners with clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500 firms to design effective workplace and organisational strategies and structures that solve a broad range of long-term strategic workforce challenges across the talent lifecycle. We know the talent lifecycle in particular has been very, very challenging in light of the Great Resignation or the Great Awakening, and we'll get into that during the course of the show. Now, prior to starting HPS, Patty worked as Chief Human Resources Officer for several public and private firms. She's worked at C-suite level with clients including Microsoft, Target Corporation, Facebook, Deloitte, Accenture, and more, as well as a number of Silicon Valley startups. She also holds a Master's in Social Work from the University of Pennsylvania, somewhere where she also works as a guest lecturer. She's also a former practising therapist, and as a thought leader, she's been featured in publications including Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and Entrepreneur Magazine. We are in great company today. She's discussed subjects as a guest lecturer including conscious capitalism, empathy-driven leadership, leading in the new world of work, high-performing teams, and executive presence. So I can't wait to get involved into this conversation. I should mention as well, Patty is also working on her first leadership book, due for release in 2023. So watch this space. Of course, it's obvious with all of that to see why I had to invite Patty to the show. I can't wait to discuss all aspects of HR on the podcast. So without further ado, Patty Carl, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
Thank you, Nick. Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
Me too. Well, let's start then. First question I ask all of my guests, which is this: what do the words human resources mean to you?
Well, it describes my whole career, for sure. I spent, 20 plus years working in human resources. I think what's interesting, though, is the perception that others have of the words human resources. I sort of know what it means to me, but I think that to some business leaders, it means the people that you don't say anything in front of, if you don't want to, get called into the principal's office, so to speak, or focused on, compliance. So it has I think, a different connotation sometimes with business leaders than it does for people who sit in the function. And you can see a reflection of that in some of the ways that the titles are changing to chief people officer or people in culture and those kinds of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Absolutely. And as a recruiter, I think it's fair to say the talent market has been way hotter than something I've ever seen before. I've been in teams now for 20 years and it's been absolutely crazy. Organisations struggling with talent retention and engagement. The Great Resignation or the Great Awakening taught us employers opting out of situations where ultimately they don't feel valued or even invested in. So from your experience at HPS, what are some of the ways companies can build in strategies that keep their people energized, keep their people loyal, and hopefully, reduce that retention problem that we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think there's been some really seismic shifts in the talent market. And as you said, and I just actually put these words in my latest newsletter, it is the hottest talent market I've ever seen in my career. It's starting to cool in some areas, especially for, if you look at the statistics, it's starting to cool in terms of people working on site fully.
Yeah.
But the remote jobs are still, they're still getting, many, many applicants per posting. And so you can see that people are sort of voting with their feet in terms of what they're asking for from a work-life perspective. I think the employer-employee contract, if you will, and I know that some countries have actual contracts. In the US. We don't so much unless you're an executive. But that relationship has changed. Certainly because it's a buyer's market right now in terms of talent being able to have their choice in terms of roles in the marketplace. But I also think that some things have shifted indefinitely.
Sure.
And I think that what people are demanding in terms of their work configuring to their lives and not vice versa, they're going to continue to pursue that. And even if it means that they're going to be unemployed or underemployed, or if they have to go out on their own, that sort of that calculus for them doesn't work anymore. The calculus that I don't know if you did, I grew up with as a Gen Xer. I think that what we saw is there are people who in our generation and generations before us who worked extremely hard, to the exclusion of other things in their lives, like, family time and hobbies and pursuing other interests and sleep, things like that. And that calculus doesn't work for millennials, and it doesn't work for Gen Zs. And I have two adult sons who are Gen Z, and they watched, myself and my husband work very long, hard hours. And I think, they're saying that isn't what I want for my life. I want to have more balance. I want to be able to have other interests. I want to, whether that's sort of a side hustle like we have today, where people have, they're multi-hyphenates. They're a, you might be one even, right? A consultant, a recruiter, a podcaster, right?
Yeah.
People have sort of these, what a friend of mine calls a portfolio career, where you do multiple things that may or may not have a common thread running through them, because they interest you, and perhaps it's an area of strength. People are really prioritizing those aspects of their lives very differently than they have in years past.
Sure. What do you think it is then where was the straw that broke the camel's back? We had the pandemic, which we know rapidly advanced things. It forced people to work from home. Funnily enough, you were talking then about how we worked growing up and what we saw in our parents and things like that. I actually have a website that's dormant now called allbefore9am.com, with that whole premise where we had to get things done before 9 a.m. But we now live in a culture where 9 a.m. is almost doesn't exist anymore, right? We've got the flexible work from different locations across borders and so on. But it's rapidly advanced. We've seen that in the world of recruitment. We've seen it in the world of talent retention. It's very easy for us to say the pandemic was the thing that caused it. I would argue we were already on this journey before, but perhaps at a much slower pace. But was there something that you've seen in the market where actually there was the straw that broke the camel's back? So actually this has to change now. And if there was, what do you see as being the biggest driver now for change? It always used to be in the world that I've worked in, higher salary meant you had to move. People move for higher salaries. We're not seeing that now as recruiters. Salary is definitely not the first part of the conversation when they come to me to say, Nick, I need some support looking for a new position. What are you seeing on your side?
I agree with you that there were macro trends already in flight pre-pandemic. And that was women starting to opt out of a traditional workforce because of the demands on their time and high levels of burnout. Organizations starting to think about DEI much more seriously, and people wanting more flexibility and balance in their lives. What happened was the pandemic accelerated it. And I think it accelerated it for workers, but it also accelerated it for companies in a lot of ways. So working, as I did in human resources for so many years, I was always an advocate for flexible work. I was flexible with my team and allowed them to work from home, even if other parts of the organization didn't really allow that. So I was trying to sort of blaze a trail for thinking about work differently, and from my perspective, treating people like adults, unless they prove themselves otherwise, right? Sort of starting with trust first until I see that someone hasn't earned it. the pushback I always got from leadership was, well, the jobs in my area can't be done remotely, until they could.
Until they could, yeah.
And so now I think it's tough for organizations to backpedal from that because they've been doing the work from home for so long. They've been productive. And so they're attempting to, organizations who want people to come back in are pointing to things like culture, because all of the other arguments and objections kind of were disproven. So it's accelerated it for organizations too. I mean, they're really grappling with how to deal with, what the talent market's demanding, sure, how people want to work today. And it certainly accelerated it from a worker perspective. So what we saw during the pandemic, from that macro trend perspective was, one, women had to opt out of the workforce because their children were doing remote learning. And it was often the women who were were the primary caregivers. And so they had to leave in order to manage the education of their children or childcare. It was a major, major childcare challenge. And then we had things like the George Floyd incident and how people responded to that in the United States, and just an outpouring of outrage, really, and demanding that organizations take a stand, which is something kind of new for organizations. A lot of times they like to kind of play the middle,
sure,
and not get involved. And the way that I saw the CEOs struggling with how to support how their employee base felt about some of these things, and also, their tendency to want to be to remain neutral. There was this real, sort of battle within to figure out how to address these things. To be a good corporate citizen, at the same time, they have businesses to run, right? And so trying to balance that, I think, has been inordinately difficult for the CEOs that I've worked with and the other business leaders. And it's very much driven by the demands of the people.
Sure. I think you've touched on a couple of things there. I'd just like to summarize and to highlight. I think one is we've definitely gone from a work, we're now in a work to live rather than a live to work mentality for those coming in. I think that's a real positive shift. You touched on something that I think was really interesting though, which we haven't really discussed too much on the show. We definitely should, is it's been a rapidly advancing thing for workforces, for companies, but actually for those that have got it right, they've also, for many of them, I'm generalizing slightly because it won't be true for everyone, just like the pandemic and the changes aren't, flexibility isn't right for everyone either. But those that have got it right actually have seen huge positive returns, both on their bottom line, diversity of thought, the way that they operate, saving costs on, warehouse space or head office space, as cost savings we had. So actually those that do embrace it and have embraced it quickest are now finding that they're getting some really phenomenal returns on that. And it's really interesting to see. And actually, we're slowly now seeing those late adopters starting to make some changes. I see it in the world of recruitment, clients that categorically said, no, we're sticking to people coming back to the office, that now are saying, actually, Nick, we've added a bit of flexibility. We're now able to do hybrid or something similar. And they realize that they don't adopt, they get left behind. And you're right, we've talked a lot about in previous episodes about how it's impacted the employee and getting the employee engagement piece right. But actually, as you very rightly pointed out, there's been some phenomenal results beneficial results for businesses that have actually, gone wholeheartedly into these changes as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. There were many that were leaders. They were out front, even pre-pandemic, on things like flexible work, providing, helping to provide for childcare, all of these things, that paternity leave, all of the things that people have been asking for. So there were certainly some that were sort of before their time on some of this, and others are running to catch up. And we've heard from a few people recently, whether it's Elon Musk or the head of some major financial institutions, who say, we're all coming back full time. We're all doing that. It sounds to the ears of the talent market as very outmoded, very outdated to have that perspective. And in some ways, that perspective comes from a real place of privilege. If you don't have to worry about all the life things because they get handled for you, and you have ample resources to take care of those things, then yeah, it seems really easy to come back into the office. But when you look at, the average worker, there is a lot for them to juggle and still have some semblance of a life. And so I think you're right. The people who have sort of put a stake in the ground to say everyone must come back fairly quickly pulled that stake back up because they were losing. They're going to lose. And at their core, they're pragmatists. They definitely don't want to, regardless of how they feel, they don't want to lose key talent and to have a lot of disengagement. It's an interesting dynamic that people have created, but I also think it's really good for companies in a lot of ways. So you mentioned office space. When the pandemic started and it looked like we were all going to be in it for a while, I wondered how long it would be before the CFO started to celebrate because they could shut down space and save all of that cost. I mean, it's incredibly costly. But the thing that I think it does, and this is a real challenge, is if you were an organization that relied on having everybody in the same space, being able to stay close to everyone and be able to create an environment that people came into that was reflective, hopefully, of the culture that they wanted to drive. If that's missing, then how do you do that? Because there isn't a great roadmap for that for organizations. And I think that's the worry that's reflected when the CEOs say everyone has to come back, because they don't know how else to do that.
Sure.
Where the responsibility lies is with leaders. Because when you think about it, two employees who work in the same company under different leaders can have vastly different experiences.
Absolutely.
One could say, I love my job, super engaged, love the team, love what I'm doing, and have the flexibility that I need. My boss really gets me. And the other one could say, never talk to my boss, a lot of backbiting on the team. I don't love the work I'm doing. I never get recognition. So that's the same organization and very vastly different experiences. And those are driven by the leaders, right? Because organizational cultures are actually a collection of microcultures. And the microcultures are shaped by the leaders themselves. And I think what we see right now is that a lot of our leaders without sort of that big infrastructure are struggling to drive the kind of culture that they need because they are underprepared. They haven't been trained and developed in the right way to be able to take on the mantle of managing culture for their team.
I think you raised some really interesting points, some great points. I think you mentioned trust earlier on one of your answers, and Stephen Covey talks all about trust and inspire employees. If you trust them, they'll do great work. But something we've noticed, you mentioned leaders there being a critical point to consider. And I know, Patty, you're very passionate about mental health and wellness as well. But what we do know is since these changes, these new ways of working, it's taken people a lot of time to adjust. There's a fear sometimes that they have to be online all the time because otherwise my boss is micromanaging me. And some bosses haven't yet got accustomed to output-led management. So they are sometimes micromanaging. There's loads of other things as well besides that. Just being connected 24/7 can have a real impact on mental health. What are some of the things that leaders can do to support employees' mental health, reduce workplace stress in this new world of work, and really build up that positive work environment in the case that you just gave with that one leader versus the other? How can we foster that?
Yeah, I think a few things, and they'll sound very simple, but they're not easy. First and foremost, leaders have to make people feel connected and like they belong. Like that is just an innate human need. We all need to feel like we're connected and that we belong, because we are, if you look at evolution, it's our sense of connection and community that actually made us survive as a species, right? And so when you think about those very, very basic needs, we don't talk a lot about those needs in the workplace. Some of that feels a little soft, but I always say, like, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. If it were easy, everyone would do it. And so you have leaders who don't know how to make that connection. They aren't sure even how to ask the questions, right, of their employees about what gets them up in the morning, what's exciting to them, where is that, precious intersection of, strength and interest, and how can I put more of that in your job than the stuff that you hate, right? And let's move the stuff that you hate to somebody else on the team who loves it. Like, let's be creative about letting people spend time in their sweet spot, and really playing to their own individual superpowers. That's complex, right? It's easier in some ways as a leader to say, this is the job description. These are the job descriptions. This is the way it works. Go do your job. Your recognition is your paycheck. And no news is good news. If I reach out to you and have something to say, then it's usually going to be a critique of a course correction that you need to make.
Yeah.
And sort of having this very, I call it the peanut butter spread. Like, it's a very peanut butter spread leadership. It's like people are more like widgets. And so you treat them all sort of exactly the same, and which means that you probably don't treat any of them in the way that they would like to be. Because the alternative is to get really, to do what I call personalized leadership, which is to get really personal with your people. And I don't mean blurring boundaries, right? People, of course, we have boundaries, and those are important, but we do have to lean in more to what's going on with each one of our people. You could have a team of, 3 people, and they're all in different seasons of life.
Right.
You might have someone who's close to retirement. You might have someone who's just early career. And then you might have someone who is a parent of young children. What they need just from a life perspective, forget the job piece for a second, but just from a life perspective, they have very different lives, right? And then you sort of layer on to that, okay, what are their social needs? What are their emotional needs? And I know it feels weird to talk about that at work, but we are primarily emotional creatures. And so we've got to be able to talk about that.
We're moving into a coaching culture, though, aren't we? That's success. We're coming away from that command and control piece. It's almost old hat to even say that now. But I would say personalized leadership probably takes a coaching culture to another level. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I work with leaders, executive leaders all the time, and both on the show and in coaching and other things. And we forget that everyone goes through trauma in their lives at some point. We don't know, it doesn't matter who you are, there'll be trauma that impacts you that your work might not know. I went to a thoroughly engaging conversation by someone called Bev Thorogood, who's going to come onto the show later in a future episode, which was talking about being perimenopausal. And actually that can impact women at different ages. And if your boss doesn't know, if I wasn't aware of it, those symptoms could start 3, 4, 5 years before, actually you go through the menopause itself. So there are loads of things that can be impacting. You could be scared to come to, or to bring these things to work, therefore scared to show your best self. So as you said at the start, there are leaders that say that's your job description. But if we don't ask questions, it's really, really hard to find out how we can really impact or improve mental health. You raised something really interesting. It's I think it's a Rich Litvin thing, but it's sort of a hell yes and hell no piece. You mentioned earlier that, some people's to-do lists, or when people don't like doing something, actually that could be something else in the same team loves doing. For me, I don't like doing Excel spreadsheets and accounts, right? So it's in my job description in inverted commas, but actually there'll be people in my team that love that work. So why don't I do the bit that they hate if I like it, and swap over, right? And we're both winning. I think you just raised some really fantastic points, and I think personalized leadership, certainly from my personal view as a podcast host of this show, is absolutely the right route to be taking if we really want to get on top of this mental health challenge, which is that's a pandemic on its own at the moment.
For sure, it's a pandemic, and I think that the way that we're talking about things now, and we put these things on the table much more than we used to, I think is healthy. But I also think it's complicated for leaders, because now they're grappling with a lot more stuff than they ever did before. Sure. If it was just sort of about the work and I didn't have to worry too much about the human, that's maybe easier, feels easier to me. And the other thing is that you find that leaders, we often rise through organizations because we're really good problem solvers. We're able to get stuff done, and we can solve problems, and we're efficient and effective at doing that. what you find with leadership now is that you have to really lean into curiosity, and you have to lean into vulnerability, and you have to navigate some really dicey conversations with people, and you have to talk about feelings and all of that. And so that's tougher, right, for leaders to be able to do. But it's like leaders are the difference makers. They're the difference makers in whether people, especially now, because if you're not coming into a site, a work site, then your leader is the difference maker for you. They will dictate whether you stay or you go. And the way that they show up will influence, it has tremendous influence over your whole life. I mean, if you think about, and this is really, I think, important in mental health, if you think about this false construct that we have between work and life. As an example, if you have someone who, and I recently had a coaching client like this who was really struggling with an abusive boss. It was beyond being a tough boss. It was really denigrating. That was affecting her entire life, her relationships at home, her sleep, her eating. Everything was affected. So this idea that there's the idea that we had a separation, we didn't, right? We like to think we do. We like to compartmentalize, but it doesn't work that way. And vice versa, right? If I have a lot of stuff going on at home, I have a child who has a grave illness, that's going to affect what happens at work. And so it's not if those situations happen, it's how the leader navigates them that matters.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can any recruiter understand my HR recruitment challenges? Please don't give up on your hiring challenges just yet. Here at JGA HR Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting, and retaining top human resources talent. We also understand just how costly a poor hire can be. JGA HR Recruitment would like to partner with you to help you overcome your hiring challenges. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
I want to talk about intentional cultures in a moment, but I just want to hold and land on this point for a moment, because I think you raised a really interesting point here for leaders. And many people that listen to this show are leaders in their own right. They're HR directors, HR managers, global L&D professionals, and so on. From what you've said, if we think about the amount of impact a leader has on a business, those micro cultures you mentioned earlier on in the show, and we think about Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule, well, in that case, then we should probably be spending more time with those leaders than we do. We end up spending 80% of our time with sometimes the non-performers almost, and we think the leaders are fine to come with themselves. I'm just listening to what you said. Would you suggest then that at the moment in a lot of company cultures and businesses, we're not giving our leaders enough support? Do they need more support than what they're currently getting? And is that what you're seeing in the organizations that you're working with?
Absolutely, they need more support, because the entire sort of leadership agenda has changed on a dime for them. And I would proffer that we didn't do as great a job as we could have at developing them even before everything changed. Again, because people get rewarded and ascend through organizations, not necessarily based on leadership skills. It's primarily based on how good are you at your job. It's still that way. We know better, but we still do it. How good are you at problem solving? And then when you have to sort of crosswalk to becoming this really empathic leader and leaning into curiosity, it's almost an opposite muscle that you have to build. And we haven't given our leaders that kind of support. We don't tell them how to do it. We don't let them know what our leadership expectations are. We talk about what their job expectations are, but not the leadership piece, right? We talk a lot more about, here are the results that you have to achieve. And if you're doing a terrible job, you probably won't stay in a leadership position. But if you're just doing a below average job, and you're still getting results, you'll probably stay in that position. We haven't given them the tools. We haven't set the expectation, and we haven't given them the tools. And I see it This is not true just for sort of early career or mid-career leaders. This is true in the executive ranks who have, many, many years, decades of experience, and they are not sure how to navigate the current landscape.
Yeah, and there's an assumption because of those titles, those roles, those companies that they have the answers, right? So we don't ask the right questions. I think I don't know if it's the same in the US, but something that resonates with me, you mentioned there, was talking about the problem solvers often are the ones that get into leadership roles. Well, actually, in the UK, that's also true. But I would also say a lot of people get into leadership roles just through duration of tenure. They get to the top of their banding. There's nowhere else to go. We've kind of got to make them a team leader now because they've been here for 5 years or whatever it is. And they get that promotion, not from any, I'm not saying they don't deserve that promotion always, but often it's not because of their competency as leaders. It's because they've hit a threshold in the salary bandings or whatever. And they've gone, we kind of need to do something here because they've been with us for years. But they don't give them the training or the tools to do that. I think you've raised some really fantastic points, and hopefully lots of things are resonating with the listeners we've got here. Now, I know that we've discussed a lot about the importance of building a strong culture. We know it's really more important now that companies shift and adapt because of the Great Resignation, because of hybrid work and more. So what can leaders do to create intentional cultures, including what you referenced as microcultures? You mentioned that earlier in the show, in this new way of working. And I guess taking the question one further on, what are important aspects to ensure the company is still moving in the right direction?
The company does have to set the cultural direction. There has to be an overarching set of expectations from the organization about how we expect people to show up. We have to talk about the behaviors, the values that we have, because that will be true north for all of the leaders. How that gets enacted at each, sort of within each microculture will look a little bit different. And that's okay. You would expect that. You see that in global companies all the time, right? You have different sort of geographies and the cultures that come along with that. So you'll always have microcultures. We always have had them. We always will have them. But it's up to the organization to set the tone so that those leaders have a framework within which to operate and set up their own culture. The thing that I think leaders at the top of the house often neglect to do is to set the tone and continue to talk about it. And I managed internal and CEO communications for in many roles throughout my career. Sometimes it was under me, sometimes it wasn't. Mostly it was. And one of the things that I would reinforce with them is you have to tell people what you're going to tell them again, tell them until you're so tired of telling them. You're so tired of hearing your own voice. And then they may have just gotten it. Because the CEO, often, and the other executives in the company, they sort of implement something and then they're off to something else. I mean, they've got very big jobs. The thing with culture is you have to keep talking about it because people forget and they need to sort of be brought back into the fold. They need to remember what you think about. And also when you think about the nature of turnover in organizations, you have to keep saying it because people are new.
Yeah.
And you have to keep reminding people, and you have to sort of, from that culture, hinge all the things off of that, like policies, for example. And speaking of things, the hell knows, I don't like writing policy at all. But what I know about policy is you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. You can't say we are a flexible, family-friendly environment and then not have, adequate parental leave or not allow flexibility, right? So you have to have all of the ways that you interact with employees, whether it's via policy or communications, whatever that is, it has to reflect the culture that you've been talking about. Yeah. So that it all feels aligned to people. It doesn't feel like there are inherent conflicts. And then that allows the leaders, of course, you have to train the leaders, but that just doing that allows them to create sort of, okay, that's my framework. And now how do I enact that with my team?
You said something really interesting, almost like it was a comment that came in and went out again, which is, of course, you've got to train your leaders, but actually something that I've seen, and of course you do, but there's been a bit of a trend about people bringing in new values and behaviors and mission statements. They come on a big shiny walls, you put them up and, hey, these are our new values, right? But actually a lot of them haven't been trained. They're not embedded in the way that you've mentioned. They're not embedded in policy, not embedded in appraisal. So for us, we run a sales environment. We have sales numbers to hit when it comes in terms of recruitment. But actually, when we appraise people, it's not just about the number. It's about whether or not you've lived the values and behaviors that we believe in. Have you been honest? Have you been, all the different things that we do? But it's so interesting to see, actually, I don't know if it's been the same in the US, I'm sure it must have been, where there's a huge shift towards our new values and behaviors in this new world of work, but nothing actually changes. And it's not just in the telling everyone this is what it's new, you've got to live them, and the do as well, and the training piece. Obviously, you're working with some huge clients in what you do. Have you seen that happen, though, where it's been a little bit of an announcement without necessarily the embedding bit underneath? It's so important.
Yes, and I've seen that throughout my career, where we have values, we put posters on the wall.
Yeah, this is it.
And we're good, we're good. The reality is, if you look from company to company, the values aren't all that different. Everybody's got some sort of hustle or speed or something in there. It's something about integrity. It's something about teamwork. They're all generally a similar flavor. So it almost in some ways doesn't matter that you sit and wordsmith your values to death and that you have all these, you have to change all the words. What matters is how you hinge everything off of that and how you talk about it, and you keep beating the drum on it, and you walk the talk, and then you tell people how you're walking the talk. And you connect in your communications, whenever you're coming out with something, you bring it back to your values. You have the values as the underpinning and the way that you talk about everything. And that lets people know this is what we expect. This is who we are as an organization. This is our DNA. And just letting people know that over and over again. The posters are fine, but no one's going to the office anymore, so don't bother.
Good point.
What matters now is, because the leaders are culture carriers. Those are the culture carriers in your organization. It's the shadow of a leader, right? So goes the leader, so goes the organization. So you have to train them and develop them to have an understanding of how they enact that culture within, their span of control, and and imbue them with the sense of responsibility that they have, because it's a huge responsibility to be leading other people, because you impact every aspect of their lives as a leader. It is no small responsibility, and yet we haven't prepared them. And so they need to have, a very clear directive, and they need to have the right development and support to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Now, I'm conscious of time, because I feel like I could talk to you about the world of HR all day long. You're clearly an absolute expert in this field, which is fantastic, Patty. But I know that if we talk about your business, HBS, previously a CHRO, now CEO of a women-led business at HBS, and your website states you provide fast, bold, and effective results by helping organizations thrive in the rapidly changing world of work. I think, we talked about some of the names and the terms we often put in there. Speed is in there for yourselves. But I also read that your approach follows something called the 5Ps framework. So I wonder if you could tell us, the listeners, a little bit more about your background, about the Highland Performance Solutions, for those that may not be familiar, because you've worked with some fantastic clients, and not just big corporates, but startups and Silicon Valley startups as well, which you mentioned in the introduction. But also about the framework that you follow, and perhaps some of the successes that you've helped clients with. So if there is an HR leader listening to this that maybe has an organizational challenge at the now and isn't quite sure where to go, maybe they can reach out to yourself.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The way that I set up the business is, as a former practitioner, I hired businesses like mine all the time to come in and help us with, bring some expertise into the organization and help us solve problems. Because, usually the internal HR team, we're more generalists, right? And we have lots of things on our plate. And so to bring in specialized expertise and dedicated teams to help us to take on some of these big initiatives was really, really helpful. what I appreciated about the ones that I hired, that I hired again and again, is that they were fast, they knew how to partner, they were flexible, they were bespoke in their solutions. Because there are lots of organizations out there who say, here's our template, this is what we do.
Yeah.
And they try to sort of superimpose that on the organization, and maybe it doesn't quite fit because they're really wedded to their thing, right? And that's just not how organizations are. They're all so unique. They're like thumbprints. And you have to really get in and under the hood to understand what's the DNA of this organization? What do they need? How should what's the right solution or set of solutions here? And then what's the right way to implement it given where this organization is trying to go strategically? And how can we make sure that any of the culture and people, workforce, talent solutions help them accelerate that growth for their organization? It's really, really tight partnership with them and almost acting as an extension of their team. And I think that having been a practitioner, the person who was on the other side of the table, in my prior lives, I really understand the role that they have to play and how difficult it is, and the sort of the mantle of responsibility. And also because I sat in the C-suite chair, I understand how to navigate an organization and its politics and its nuances and subtleties and stakeholders that can be incredibly helpful to the C-suite leaders that we partner with.
Fantastic. I love the way you talked about bespoke solutions. I mean, I work in recruitment, right? So I have nothing but admiration for HR professionals, because we only, you deal with a plethora of issues within the HR gambit. And when you're dealing with people, it's always going to be bespoke. It's always going to be complex, because people are complex, right? And every organization is made up from a different DNA of different individuals that form it. I'm involved in just one small cycle of HR, which is talent and retention in the world of recruitment. But there aren't many other products, if we commoditize people in the industry that I work in, that can change their mind last minute. You've sold something and then actually they're changing their mind, or something changes, or it's complex always. And I think the idea of giving a bespoke solution rather than one size fits all approach, especially in the new world of work, is absolutely paramount to success, really. So I have to say, and I will be linked in the show notes to your website, which is highlandperformancesolutions.com. It's a very slick site takes you exactly where you need to go. Do check it out. Do take a look at the links. You can see more about Patty Carl's background in there, as well as the other associates in the business. So well worth having a look, and they'll be able to get to that in the show notes. I'm going to open the HR L&D vault in just a moment, Paddy, but I want to have one last question, probably not one you're expecting, but I'm going to throw it in there because I'm excited to hear, even more so now I've spoken to you today. Tell us a little bit more about your first leadership book. I don't even know if it's finished yet, but you must be getting close. That's due for release, hoping in 2023. What's it all about?
Yeah, it's about personalized leadership. Great. Which is this idea that, as we've been saying, humans are not cookies. You cannot take a cookie cutter approach. And so what are all of the aspects of, each of the people who work for us? What are all the aspects of their lives that we need to understand and, attempt to meet the needs in, so that they can be most successful and bring their best selves to work? And so really looking at certainly everyone has financial needs. You and I know that that's usually not the most important thing as people are considering an opportunity, but it is still, people have to pay the bills. And so there's table stakes: financial needs, emotional needs, social needs, possibly physical needs, depending on how people work at their best. They have life needs that you have to consider. And I would even add, people have sort of energy needs, different energy profiles that they have to consider. So to give an example of that, I'm a lark. So I'm an early to bed, early to rise person, because if something is important or deep work, it has to be done. For me, it has to be done before 9 a.m. So there's your before 9 a.m. thing.
Yeah, maybe I can bring it back.
It's just a little twist on 9 a.m. But it has to be done. I can do, lots of things. I can work even into the evening, but it's the really deep work where I need to be in flow has to be done in the morning for me. energetically. And I think people are all different, right? I have people who work for me who really don't get started until 9 p.m. at night and want to work until 1 a.m. And while we all know that business is conducted during certain hours within each country, now that we're more global, it matters less when you work. The more that leaders can sort of shape the work around all of those needs, the more likely the person will be engaged and they will stay with you and really walk through fire for you. Because this idea of quiet quitting that everyone's been talking about is what I used to call retired while walking around. There are people who just checked out. They're still there, but they're checked out. You want people who are sort of actively coming to you to say, like, I think we could do it this way. I'd really love to take this on. That's the kind of person that you want. And those people are doing that because they feel like their needs have been met. And now you have this sense of loyalty and engagement that this person want to give, because they feel like they're being fulfilled and their needs are being met.
Book sounds right up my street. I'm not just saying that, right? I don't know what I'd be. I'm probably on part lark. I go to bed late, but I get up super early at the same time. I don't need much sleep, or I don't think I need much sleep, or the bags might say different. But what I do, I am a big believer. If you get up early, right, you can't change time. Time is a construct. It's there. But we can manage our energies. I'm a big believer in energies myself. And I like to get up early, complete whatever the task is that's not work related, that allows me to go, great, I've completed something in the morning. Now I can get on with my day energized. A small example, because it's true for today's show. This morning I was up early to finish off writing a pantomime. I've been writing a panto, which is going to be performed in 2024. But I got up early. I've been getting up early every day to write this thing. And every day you get a feeling of completion, which gives you energy before you even start your working day. So I love that. I think everything you've mentioned in that book resonates with how I see the world. I think personal leadership is absolutely the future. I wish you every success with it. Please do send us the link when it's ready. I'll be very, very happy to promote it here on the show and in any newsletters we've got as well. It sounds fantastic. So let's open the HR L&D vault.
Opening the L&D vault.
If you could give one piece of advice to the world, Patty, what would it be?
Prepare your leaders for the responsibility that they're taking on for people's lives, and make sure that they understand how to provide for the people emotionally, socially, etc., so that those people can have not only do their best work, but that they can have their best lives.
Perfect. If you had the opportunity, what advice would you give to a younger you just starting out in this new world of work?
Lighten up. I was really I'm still a driver, but I took everything very seriously earlier in my career and really focused on, climbing the ladder. And I enjoyed a lot of it, but I also probably took it all too seriously. And, we have very, very long working lives. They're getting longer.
Yeah.
And I would say to her, there's no rush. You've got lots of time.
Nice. I think there'll be other people resonating with that. I like the idea as well of what got you here, Patty, to this show is not necessarily what's going to get you there. So we can change, which is good. And last but not least, what is the guiding principle or behavior you've seen in every great leader that you've worked with?
I would say authenticity, because there's no mystery for people. If you're authentic and you're transparent, then you take away the uncertainty that a lot of employees feel if they don't know where they stand, or they don't know which leader is showing up that day, or things are very cloak and dagger. Then it's really tough for them to operate and to feel that sense of psychological safety. And so what I've always said, and I hope I have lived up to it, is there is nothing nefarious ever underfoot with me. You will get no surprises. If there is something not working, you will know. If there is something that is working, you will know. I think that gives people a sense of security and sort of firm ground to stand on as they're doing their work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a good reminder that we need to celebrate our successes, not just always hit the failures, right? And you said, if you're doing something well, you will know. How often do we forget to celebrate the successes we have? But we're so quick to criticize when something goes wrong. I think it's wonderful advice and a great way to end the show. Of course, there are a number of links that I would like to direct our traffic to here today, because you need to go and see this site. It's highlandperformancesolutions.com. There will be a link in the show notes to take you straight through. There's a link there as well. It's all about leadership development for those that are interested in finding out more, and what Patty said today really resonates with you, then definitely check that out. I'll put a link into Patty's LinkedIn profile directly as well. It's Patricia Carl if you're looking out, but there'll be a link there. And there'll also be a link to their LinkedIn page as well. Are there any other links you'd like me to mention while we've got a moment here, Patty? No?
I do have a website, patriciacarl.com, which is for speaking engagements on this topic and others that I'd be happy to chat with someone if they have those opportunities.
Super. I'll make sure patriciacarl.com goes into the show notes as well. So do check those out. And of course, if you're an HR L&D professional listening to this show and need support with an HR related vacancy, you want to work with a bespoke, as we mentioned earlier, concierge level of search experience providers we are here at JJ Recruitment, and do get in touch. We can help you whatever that requirement might be anywhere in the world. You can contact myself at nick@jjrecruitment.com or any of my wonderful team at the same domain, which will also be in the show notes. So just leaves me to say once more, huge thank you. I could definitely speak to you all day about the world of HR, Patricia Carl. So thank you so much for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast.
Same here. Thank you, Nick.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into the HR L&D podcast with your host, Nick Day, CEO of JJ Recruitment, Specialist HR Recruiters. If you need any help with a current HR or L&D vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favorite podcast channels. Till next time.